There's Just Something About Kansas City is brought to you in part by the generosity of our friends at the Cockrell Family Foundation and the Sherman Family Foundation. Thank you.
Welcome once again to another episode of There's Just Something About Kansas City, where we talk about the people, places, and things that make this such a great place to live, work, raise your family. And sitting right across from me, Bill Zollars. Everybody knows Bill, the former CEO of YRC, Yellow Roadway Corporation, better known as Yellow Freight, and many, many other endeavors. I really appreciate your time today. I know they say retired, but we're going to talk about do we ever get to retire? Bill,
I'm not very good at it, Frank, but thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit. How are things with you, and how are things ever since you decided to step away from YRC?
Things are good. I've been retired, so to speak, now for since 2011.
Okay.
So, we're coming up on 13 years. Wow. But I've still got boards that I'm on, including the U.S. Postal Service Board of Governors, which is an interesting
dynamic.
Good word, dynamic. So I've got a lot of stuff going on, and then we're going to talk a little bit about this latest endeavor, which is the CEO Academy of Kansas City, which has been taking up a little bit of time.
Yeah, this is absolutely fascinating. CEO Academy of Kansas City. So I started to do some research on this, and this is it's really incredible because you're training up-and-coming business people. They could even be CEOs now somewhere,
right,
who want to be better at their job, or aspiring business people who want to be a CEO someday.
Correct.
Which is phenomenal. There's never been anything like this out there, except for trying to climb the rungs of the industrial ladder, and it can get pretty slippery on those rungs sometimes.
Right.
So what is it exactly you try to do? And I know we're talking now, it is late August in 2024,
right.
Okay? They want to sign up by mid-September, okay,
Correct.
in order to get into your 2-day seminar in October.
Correct.
And so that is really important to know. But just go to CEO Academy. You can Google it, do anything. It's going to come right up.
Right.
Make sure you say Kansas City, because I didn't realize they're doing this not just all over the country, but I saw Dubai.
Yeah.
It's all over the world. They are doing these academies. This is incredible.
Yeah, so a little background on this, Frank. The reason this kind of came up to begin with was when I came to Kansas City in '97, I got tremendous support from the local business community, particularly leadership in the business community. And in talking to a couple of my friends who had the same experience, Dan Hesse and Greg Graves being two.
Yeah, Dan Hesse from Sprint, and
right.
then Greg Graves from Burns & McDonnell.
Correct. Mm-hmm. So I was talking to them about this particular problem we have in Kansas City, which is a lot of that support has ebbed and has gone away, either because been changing leadership, companies have been acquired or moved or whatever, but there's not the same kind of support from the existing leadership that we got when we first got to Kansas City. So we started talking about that and said, wouldn't it be nice if we could kind of resurrect something that would do that for the younger leadership that's developing? And there's a tremendous amount of talent in Kansas City that's coming up, but they don't have the same kind of support system that we had. And they also, I think, don't have the opportunity to network with each other because there's not a real good forum for that. And when I was just coming here, I started something called the KC Business Roundtable, which was the top 10 employers in Kansas City, because we didn't really have an opportunity to get together. And that gave us an opportunity to get together and work on some things that we all wanted to get done in the community. So that was kind of the genesis of it. And then we wanted to make it unique. And the way this is unique is that most of these kind of leadership development kinds of opportunities, CEO or otherwise, are led by people that have never actually been CEOs. They've watched CEOs and they've talked to CEOs.
They probably always talk behind your back, I could be better than that CEO, right?
This person is terrible.
Right.
So we wanted a unique faculty, as we're calling them, and we put together 8 former CEOs. All of them are very experienced. All of them have done the job. on a day-to-day basis. So when they're talking to what we're calling the students,
right,
the either current want-to-be better CEOs or potential CEOs, they're actually speaking from experience. They're not speaking from a textbook or speaking from what they heard from somebody else or just from watching. We've got faculty members that have actually done it. So we got 8 of those. Interestingly enough, I thought we might have some trouble recruiting former CEOs. We had no trouble. Every single one of them that we talked to wanted to do it. They're all doing it pro bono, so there's no pay involved. And then the other thing we thought about was, we really should probably partner with an academic institution because it'll give us 2 things. One, some administrative support, because none of us has any administrative support.
You weren't teachers. Well, you were teachers in a certain way, but not that way, right?
But I don't have an assistant, which is,
That's true.
And most of these people don't. So we thought about who would be the best fit as an academic partner in this thing. And of course, when you think of Henry Bloch, you think of one of the great CEOs of Kansas City.
Yes.
And so we went to the Bloch School. I met with Brian Klass, the dean, and I laid this idea out. They loved it, and they've been incredibly supportive and have been a great partner for us as we go
right. And your seminar, your 2-day, I don't know what exactly you call it, but your seminars, a 2-day event will be at the Bloch School right there on UMKC.
The whole thing will be at the Bloch School campus. It's October 17th and 18th.
Right, of this year, 2024.
2024. If it goes well, we'll probably do it some more.
I think it's going to go well. Okay, that's just from me.
Well,
okay, this is the
thanks.
first year, but I think it's going to go pretty well.
Yeah, we're off to a good start. We're getting a lot of interest. I think things like this will help get the word out. But we're getting the right caliber of people right in the student population, because we wanted to make sure that we were hitting people that were actually on a path to be CEOs or had been recently named CEOs and were looking to improve.
Yeah, right. And the other thing, they really aren't students per se. They're not in college, but just to clarify that a little bit, they're already in business. They're trying to aspire to be better in that business. Did you ever find, do you find now more, you said there was a lot of camaraderie, and actually then there was a lot of friendship as you were coming up and doing your thing, and everybody's get together. Do you find now it's more of your boss saying, I don't want you to associate with those guys over there? Or there's stuff like, is there more jealousy? Is there more corporate, trying to keep it under their own dome?
I'm not sure it's that covert, okay, but it's more kind of a inability to connect
communicate
for whatever reason, right? So when I got here, Dan Hesse had just gotten here. Greg went into the CEO job a little later, but there was, this Kansas City Business Roundtable. We met every month. We'd get together, have a couple of cocktails, solve the world's problems, and really get to know each other. And I don't think there is a forum for that today. So it's not necessarily that people are trying to separate themselves, but they're busy doing whatever they're doing, and there just isn't a regular place where they can go to get together. And we're hoping coming out of this academy that will generate some impetus to get that group kind of together on a regular basis. And then if we do this, every year, or maybe a couple times a year, that'll kind of generate some momentum, and we can get more support for the new leaders.
Yeah, again, it's called the CEO Academy. Just go anywhere and find it. Try to get signed up by, if you're not in 2024, I'm pretty sure this is going to work again. So it's going to be mid-September next year, and then October again. Got to sign up by mid-September, which is something to keep in mind. But again, you will spawn now the next roundtable of CEOs, and I think that's important on their way
Yeah,
up,
that's
right?
the objective, Frank. And I think the other thing you can do is you can go on the UMKC website and apply through the UMKC website. So, it's pretty easy to get in. We're charging $3,000 per student, so it's not a ridiculous amount of money.
And for what you're going to get out of it, and from the people and from the connections you're going to make, that is well worth.
Plus, you get dinner and 2 lunches.
There you go. Okay, free meals.
How bad can it be?
Nothing better than that. Absolutely. But and I think this is a way, and I think we were talking about this before we came on. when you were on the Cerner board and continue to be. Are you still on the Cerner board now?
Cerner board.
It's Oracle now.
Yeah,
that's
Cerner
right.
board was sold to Oracle.
Right.
A couple
Okay.
years ago.
Yeah, but you were on there for a long period of time, and we talked to Cliff Illig, and he's talked to other people about the fact, sometimes for those people where it's more technical type thing,
right.
you have to go places to recruit people to
right.
come to Kansas City to work.
Right.
And we often suggested to him, I think it was my wife Sarah, she suggested, why don't you and the Stowers Institute or whatever get together, form your own university or schooling, grab the kids locally out of high school that are interested, the STEM type
right.
kids,
right.
and educate them. Do it like the military academy does it. We'll pay for your education. You
right.
give us 5 years of your life, and I think you can sell them on the fact that if they stay here for that period of time and do that, they're going to stay in Kansas City and
yep.
thrive in Kansas City.
No, that's right. And,
yeah.
Cerner kind of broke the code on how to get that done here. Didn't have their own university, but what they found was that, you get a little traction in something like that. I mean, you get the first 1,000 kids coming out of college that come to Kansas City and love it. The next 1,000 is easier. And then
yes.
1,000 after that is easier than that because now you're starting to build a community,
right.
and now you can attract
word
people.
of mouth.
Right, and they recruited primarily from Midwestern schools. So they didn't go to the Ivy League, and they didn't go to Stanford and UCLA.
Right. MIT and
right.
all those places.
But they were able to get really talented people that liked the environment here. And it's back to the title of your podcast. I mean, there's just something different about Kansas City and special that you don't find in some of the other places.
Yeah, really. And I think this is a good time for us. I mean, I think we're on the rise the past several years, maybe starting back with the World Series and appearance in 2014, the All-Star game before that, and then the World Series championship, and then the Chiefs going crazy. The draft, the NFL draft's here, World Cup's coming here. I mean,
yep.
everything just looks great in Kansas City right now.
Yeah, a lot of momentum for sure. The
right.
one thing that hasn't gotten the same momentum is the business community. And again, it goes back to this idea of what can we do to help, get that jump started a little bit.
Okay, so one of your speakers, which is great to have Mark Donovan on there, of course, the president of the Kansas City Chiefs, that's a real grab for a guy who's had the success he's had doing what he's had, or doing what he does. That draws people in and say, boy, I wonder what Mark has to say about
right.
the business side of the NFL to get people who are attracted to that side
right.
of business. And then you have many, many business leaders. Like you said, you have, Dan Hesse and Greg Graves. I think you have Beryl Raff from Hellsburg.
Right.
You've got Dave Dillon from Kroger. We'll talk about your Kroger affiliation as well. But you have some real corporate giants here speaking to these people about, ascending the ladder success.
Yeah, I think everyone has a different path. But they're all very experienced CEOs, and they all have a different perspective. But the amount of experience that'll be in that room for the 2 days is pretty amazing. And as I said, they're all doing it pro bono, which
right.
to me is just another example of how people want to give back to Kansas City.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk a little bit about the platform itself and about what you're going to talk to these individuals about on a sort of the Reader's Digest version of this thing.
Right.
You're going to, I think, Mark Donovan's going to talk about, success, starting up, the important roles. You got succession. Talk about that in a minute. Of course, the HBO Succession was interesting. But, just talk about what certain people are going to pick out and discuss with the people that they talk
Sure. What we tried to do was give people an area that they were really interested in. So each one of our so-called faculty members, each one of our former CEOs is talking about something that they've got a lot of passion around. So I'm going to kick it off and talk about strategy and how important it is to get the right strategy and for the CEO to own it. And my example is Kodak, where I was employed for 24 years.
Long time, yeah.
And how I watched them fly that company into the mountain.
Yeah.
And how it didn't have to happen, but it was all strategically related. So I'm starting with that. Dan's going to talk about culture and how important culture is to a company and a CEO and how the CEO really has to drive the culture. Beryl's going to talk about succession and how important it is to have a plan and how the board plays a role in succession. And then we've got Brent Schaefer, who was the CEO at Cerner for 3 years, Followed Neil Patterson after Neil unfortunately passed away. Brent's going to talk about using the board as an asset, because a lot of these CEOs that are new haven't really ever had a board.
Right.
And so you can really use the board as an asset to help the CEO if you know what you're doing. And so Brent's going to talk a little
and
about
it's such a basic thing.
Yeah.
He goes, well, who do I put on the board? You know, just that simple question. Well, who goes on the board?
Right.
To have that in the back of your mind, oh, that's how you did it.
Yeah. I mean, it's another team, right?
Right.
It's just the board is just another team, which is the right way to think about it. How can you get the most skilled players on the team that can help you be successful?
Right.
So Brent is going to talk about that. Brent Stewart is going to talk about how you help the community help your business. So Brent ran the United Way here for a long time, also ran the United Way in a couple other really big cities, tremendous amount of experience. So Brent's, who's now in Ocala, Florida, by the way, is coming back to do that for us. And then Dave Dillon is going to talk about feedback from all of your constituencies and how important it is to listen to that feedback and
good and bad.
And adjust to whatever you're hearing from them. And then our wrap-up speaker is David Feinberg, who is a trained child psychiatrist, which when I was interviewing him to become the CEO of Cerner, I was a little concerned because anytime I'm talking to a psychiatrist, I don't know who's interviewing who, and you know what bad.
I was just going to bring that up. Okay.
Yeah, what bad things is you got to figure out about me and maybe use against me. But David has got an incredibly eclectic background. So he ran the UCLA medical system, which is a giant system, as you know. Then he went to Geisinger and ran that medical system, which is in Pennsylvania. He went to Google and ran their healthcare part of Google, which is a big deal. And so when we were recruiting David, he had never been to Kansas City. And I made only one fatal error in my interview with him because, I was telling him about all the great things about Kansas City because he said, I don't know anything about it. I've never been there. My wife Andrea's never been there. So tell me about it. So I went through the normal quality of life is terrific, values here,
Right.
Midwestern values, really solid people. There's really everything you want to do here. There's professional sports, performing arts, music, you name it, and no traffic because
Right.
he was coming from California. So then I went a bridge too far, and I said, oh, and we have the best barbecue in the world. At which point David said, I'm a vegan.
Oh,
And I went, oh, crap. I almost had it,
almost.
But
right.
he came anyway, and once they got here, they loved it here, and they saw the same thing that most people see when they get here, which is hard to get them here because they don't know much about Kansas City.
Right.
But once they're here, they don't want to leave.
Well, let's talk about that journey for you,
Okay.
Because you are not a native Kansas Citian, although you've been here for a long period of time now and
I have.
are Kansas Citian, but you are born and raised in Minnesota.
I was.
And went to University of Minnesota.
Correct.
You are one of those parents that could actually tell your kids, I walk to and from school in the snow every day.
Uphill.
Uphill both ways,
Right.
the whole deal. But to talk about growing up, I know your dad, and I know you're incredibly proud of him. He was a 19-year-old bomber pilot, World War II, shot down over Germany.
Right.
Spent 14 months in a concentration camp.
Correct.
They were liberated by the Russians.
Correct.
So they were basically in northern Germany when he got shot down.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
just talk about your dad and mom a little bit and growing up in Minnesota.
Sure. Well, I kind of had, and some of your listeners will remember this, others won't, but I grew up in kind of an Ozzie and Harriet kind of family. Very Midwestern values. My dad was right and wrong guy. He didn't see any gray areas.
Oh, yeah.
And so I didn't really realize a lot about his background until I got older because he never talked about it.
That's the greatest generation.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
don't talk about it. Yeah.
And so, he was 19. He was a captain.
So young.
He flew a B-17, which was the biggest plane, crew of 9. in the Second World War. At 19, you know, I don't think I could have done that at 19. I don't know.
Oh, there's no way.
But it was.
I should have been in jail at 19.
Yeah,
okay. Or in the Army, one or the other.
Yeah, I could have been
a foot soldier.
Yeah, I certainly wasn't capable of taking on that kind of responsibility, but he did. He was based in England. He flew a number of missions into Germany and was shot down on one of those missions and ended up being captured and then taken to Stalag number 1. And he spent 14 months there, and he went from 6 feet 2 inches and 210 pounds to 6 feet and 140.
He lost height as long as weight.
He shrunk 2 inches.
Oh, you know what? He was probably still, at the time when he got shot, he's probably still growing. He was 19 years old.
Exactly.
Gosh,
so
that's amazing.
He went through that experience. They were liberated by the Russians. In fact, he kept a diary, which is the only reason we really know anything about the details of his imprisonment. But in the diary, if you turn to they talked mainly in the diary, he talked about what he was going to eat when he got home because they were starving. And he said the Germans were starving too, so they weren't being mistreated. Nobody had any food. They had 1 meal a day, potato soup, that was it. But in his diary, he talks about, we woke up this morning and the scuttlebutt in the camp is that the Allies are close. And then the next page, he said, we woke up this morning and the Germans are gone. And then the page after that, the Russians are there.
Right.
But the story that was really interesting was the Russian commander that came in to liberate them wouldn't let them leave the camp until a U.S. general showed up and put a gun to the Russian commander's head and said, you let them go now or I'm going to shoot you.
Right. Now I know where our diplomatic relations went with the Russians after World War II.
Yeah. And they were immediately released magically.
Bet they were.
And so it was kind of funny. My brother went to a reunion of that group, and there were still a lot of people.
Yeah, and your mom went too, correct?
My mom and my brother
Your dad had passed.
My dad passed away. But at that reunion, they were telling a lot of stories about my dad. And one of my dad's best buddies from the camp got my brother aside and said, I don't want your mom to hear this. He said, but I want you to know that when we were liberated, we went to Paris and we did everything. And my brother said, everything? He goes,
everything.
We did everything. So anyway, I think he had a pretty good recovery. Then he came back, married my mom, went to work.
Yeah, where did you meet your mom?
My mom.
Your mom. This is great. Macon, Georgia.
Macon, Georgia.
Right?
Right.
She was the valedictorian of her class.
Right.
And she was a homecoming queen.
Right.
So your dad...
Right.
Your dad, he sowed his oats in Paris and then came home and said, okay, I'm done. I'm ready to go here. Yeah.
So one of my dad's buddies, who was also in the Air Force, married a girl from Macon, and her friend was my mom. So my dad met my mom through my friend.
Where was your dad at the time?
He was in Minnesota.
Okay, so
he went down with his buddy to the wedding, I think.
Wow.
And then met my mom, and they got married, and then my mom came up to Minnesota. But every year we would pile the 4 kids, I had 2 sisters and a brother, into an unair-conditioned green Ford.
We all have these tales, yes.
Green Ford station wagon. And it was always green, and it was always a Ford.
Mom's picked a color.
I guess, I don't know.
Mom's always picked a color.
But we drove. This was before the freeway system. Mm-hmm. So we drove down Route 41 from Minneapolis to Macon, Georgia, every summer for 3 weeks so she could go visit her family.
Right.
And I couldn't understand at the time why every time we stopped for the night, my dad had a martini. But now...
Were you 4 in the back of the car and no air conditioning?
Exactly.
In the middle of the summer? Absolutely. But that is so good. And you have siblings, of course. You're the oldest of 4. You have 2 sisters and a brother, right?
Correct.
Are they? Where are they? And
my brother is in California,
okay,
Santa Cruz.
Okay.
And he's the second after the second in command was my sister Betsy. She lives in Minnesota.
Okay.
She called me one day or sent me a text and said, "We're moving," because they were in Minneapolis. "We're moving to Finland," and I said,
What?
Why? Want to be closer to Russia? What are you talking
Aren't you
about?
afraid of invasion?
She goes, no, Finland, Minnesota.
Oh,
I said,
gosh.
okay, I'm from Minnesota. I have no idea where that is. And it turns out that it's near Duluth. So she's up there.
Oh, well, she's way up near the Canadian
Yeah,
border.
and my other sister is in Minneapolis
Okay.
still. So
Yeah.
2 in Minnesota, 1 in California, and me here.
So what was it like growing up in Minnesota?
It was great. As I said, it was Ozzie and Harriet time.
Yeah.
Growing up in the 50s, which was, my early years, there wasn't much to not like about the atmosphere in the 50s. Even though I did walk through the snow uphill every day to school, it was a great experience. And, we had a really close-knit family. My dad was a banker. My mom was a homemaker.
Right.
So it was kind of an idyllic
Absolutely. Yeah.
lifestyle.
I think the 50s, all of us who grew up in that time, it was idyllic. When you look back on it now, at the time you're trying to grow up and 16 drive a car, 21 I can drink. The whole your priorities are in other places. But when you look back on your childhood and your mom and your dad and the whole thing, I think that that's incredible.
Yeah, and I think they did instill this standard of right and wrong in the family that has served all of us well.
Yes. Yeah, that is absolutely true. Yeah, God bless my mom and dad as well. They they did such a great job with me. They did a great job with my brother and my 2 sisters. So that is important. Okay, so you graduated from Minnesota.
Right.
Did very well in school. Right. Okay, Phi Beta Kappa, the whole thing. Was there any thought at that point to go back to get an advanced degree somewhere else, or were you just ready to get? And I know the Vietnam War is screaming right then too. I was right in the middle of that as well.
Yeah, so. I was in the middle of that, kind of the peak, and so I joined the National Guard.
Okay.
Didn't know whether I was going to go or not go, but joined the National Guard. My dad kind of set the standard for that, and then fortunately, never got called up.
In 70, they have the lottery.
Yeah,
so you
70,
probably had a good.
And I can remember, Frank, sitting in the barracks in basic training as they were drawing the numbers. Yeah. And as you recall, the higher the number, the less the chance you would end up having to go to Vietnam. So I'm sitting there thinking, I hope I get like number 8, because if I get like number 300, I'm going to kick myself, because here I am committing to doing this, and maybe I didn't have to.
Yeah, because 8, you would have been drafted, obviously. Yeah.
So I was like 13 or something. So I would have been.
You would have been gone. Yeah, I was sitting in. I think I was coaching football at that time back at Villanova, my alma mater, and we'd just graduated. And I remember I'd just been in my underwear in front of the board, the draft board, standing in Pittsburgh, turn this way and cough, one of those deals. We've all been through it, but I had several concussions when I played. So they reviewed it, and they said, well, we're going to make you 4F, which means you can't serve, but we're going to review this. In December, they came back and made me 1A, again, which is now you're draftable.
Right.
Okay. And then they didn't call me up. In January, they had the lottery, and I pulled 252. But they went from 1 to 150 in a month.
Yeah.
So everybody's saying it doesn't matter what number. We're all going anyway.
Right.
So it was just that sort of a situation. But for you definitely would have gone.
Yeah, I was. I had kind of mixed emotions about number 13, but at the end of the day, it was just kind of confirmed the decision I made. So I went through that, and then I had to go out and get some money. I had to go work.
You had to go work, yeah.
Yeah, because my whole college expense was, I think I paid $145 a quarter to go to the University of Minnesota.
Isn't that amazing when you think about that?
And $40 for books. Wow. So all in, $200. And you think about that today, I've got 3 kids, really 4 kids that have gone through college in the last 20 years, and those days are completely gone.
Yeah, right. They cost you tuition about every week.
Yeah.
Back in the day. Yeah, right. Exactly.
So anyway, I needed some money, so I went to work for Kodak almost right away, and as I said, spent 24 years at Kodak. The good news was, I don't think I ever had a job longer than 2 years, because they kept trying to look for something I could do. Apparently, they couldn't find anything I could do, so they kept moving me around. So I got a chance to work 5 years in Europe, in London, based in London, which was an incredible experience for my family and me.
I'll bet educational-wise, too, for the kids.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I think if you asked them today, they'd still tell you that was the best part of their growing up. And then I spent 2 years in Toronto.
Beautiful city.
Great city, very expensive city. But, one of the advantages of being an expatriate for a big company like Kodak is you get all this extra stuff that made it livable.
Right.
And then I spent a year in Japan working on a joint venture. So I had a chance to do all kinds of different things at Kodak, which kind of kept me shackled to a company I knew was going the wrong way. Mm-hmm. And so when I talk about the strategy of Kodak and all of the forks in the road, as Yogi would say, that you could have taken and they didn't take and ended up kind of just crashing the entire company, I was a little bit shielded from that because I kept being moved around. Right. And I kept thinking, well, this is not looking good, but, I got a new job. And
they gave me a raise and whole deal. And I think one of your quotes was, Kodak lost its way.
Yeah,
I think that, So that was, but I think you skipped over something there, Kodak. Did you meet somebody at Kodak that, is that where you met your wife?
I met my wife at Kodak in Chicago.
Yeah, your wife, Beth, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. And
she's from Syracuse, New York.
She's from upstate New York. And so, interestingly, there's a lot of common culture between upstate New York and the Midwest, which I never really, when people say they're from New York, most of the people in the Midwest think of big buildings.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That kind of stuff. She grew up just outside of, between Syracuse and Utica. And we met in Chicago and then got married. She went to Ithaca College, graduated from Ithaca College. She had a great career. We moved to Miami from Chicago. I went to work for Ryder. She had worked for a company called Cambridge Technology Partners, which was a technology consulting company, and then she worked for Tiffany running their corporate sales force. So she had a really good career. And then when we had Austin in '99, she stopped working and didn't go back to work until she's been doing design work and that kind of stuff, kind of on a consulting basis. But she went back as a teacher at USC, as a professor, in 3 years ago. So she's been teaching out at USC one semester every year for the last 3 years.
Yeah, right. And this is an interesting part of your story because you're here and she's now teaching in Los Angeles, okay?
Right.
And you're debating, you got balls in the air here. We got Kansas City and we've got LA. Should we get a place in LA?
Right.
Keep the place here? Should we commute? Should we do this? Should we do that? And how'd that conversation go?
It was not a tidy little thing. And most of what I do is not tidy. So
I can tell.
So our youngest son went to school, Chapman University out in Orange County in California. And so she was teaching at USC. He had gone to school there. So we bought a place actually in Laguna Beach. And our strategy was we're going to spend half the year there and half the year here. And this is another good Kansas City story because even though our youngest son was out there, so there's a magnet, and Beth's teaching, and she's really enjoying teaching at USC in urban planning. After about 2 years, she came to me and said, I really think the center of our life is in Kansas City. Our other 3 kids are in Kansas City. I like Kansas City better. All my friends are in Kansas City. I think we ought to give up on this, two-state approach. And so we sold the house in Laguna Beach and then moved back to Kansas City. So we're here pretty much now full-time. Yeah. Occasional trips to L.A. to see Austin.
Right, and we did jump over one thing, too, which is important because you were based in Chicago.
Right.
And one of your good friends, tell the story about how you're Minnesotan, you're in Chicago, I'm used to this type of lifestyle, and I'm good, okay. And then you get an offer to come to Kansas City, correct?
Yeah. So I went from Chicago to Miami because I got an offer from Ryder to start up their logistics business. So I went down there to Miami. We didn't really like Miami, Beth and I. Yeah. It's kind of a weird place.
Yeah, well, Florida itself, I'm just sort of, meh.
Yeah, we weren't sold on it. But so then I got this opportunity to come to Yellow, and I didn't know anything about Kansas City. So I did know somebody that knew a lot about Kansas City, and that was a guy named Neil Funk, who did the play-by-play for the Kansas City Kings when they were here.
I know Neil.
And then, yeah, I know you do that. It's amazing, small world. And Neil, just as a side note, Neil has 7 championship rings, NBA championship rings. He got 1 with 76ers when he was doing their play-by-play when Dr. J was there.
Right.
And then got 6 with the Bulls.
Yeah, he went from Dr. J to Michael.
Yeah.
You just go, what kind of life is this? Okay,
yeah. That's not a tough gig.
Nah.
So anyway, I called Neil and I said, hey, I got this offer in Kansas City, and I don't know anything about it. Tell me about it. And he loved Chicago, and we liked Chicago when we were there. And he said, I would move back to Kansas City in a heartbeat. And I said, really? Tell me why. So he started to rattle off all the things he loved about Kansas City. And he lived in Prairie Village when he was here and was doing the Kings play-by-play. And so basically on his recommendation, Beth and I moved up here because we didn't know anybody else that we could ask.
Did you? I'm sure you visited, right, when you were here for the interviews. They probably took you around to, well, here's this and here's that and all that sort of thing, but you still don't get a feel.
No, you got to believe. You really have to appreciate Kansas City by living here.
Right.
And that's why it's hard to get people here, but once you get them here, they're hooked.
Yeah.
And so we moved in down on 56th Street near the plaza when we first came to Kansas City. And immediately, we felt like home. And as I said, the reception from not only the business community, but from our neighbors and everyone else we met in Kansas City was spectacular.
Yeah, right.
And not only for me, but for Beth, too. I mean, she immediately was welcomed into the community and involved in stuff. And so right from the beginning, it was good. And I had to go back and tell Neil, as much as I hate to compliment the guy, because, he's hard enough
he's Neil.
He's hard enough to live with without complimenting him. But I said, you really owe you a lot, because without you telling me Kansas City was great, not sure I would have come.
Yeah.
And so that was in 97. And so we've been here ever since, basically.
Yeah. And tell the story about Bobby Bell. We'd told this before.
Right.
We were sitting out there talking. This is a great story. You met Bobby Bell when you got here. So.
Yeah, Bobby Bell, for your listeners that don't know his history, went to the University of Minnesota. Was an All-American. And basically an idol of mine growing up. And so when I first got here, Yellow had a suite at Arrowhead, and we had a game where we were entertaining some customers, and the door opened, and Bobby Bell walks in. Of course, I know immediately who he is. And he said, which one of you is Zollars? I said, that would be me. He goes, you're a gopher, right? And I said, yeah. He goes, well, I'm a gopher too. I go, I know who you are. And he said, how you doing? How are you adjusting? I said, I'm having trouble. And he said, why? Why are you having trouble? I said, well, I'm still trying to get over the fact that the Chiefs beat the Vikings in the Super Bowl in the 69-70
And this is what year?
Oh, this is 87.
Okay. All right.
So I'm a slow learner.
You still haven't gotten over it. Yeah.
Viking fans are weird. I mean,
we've seen the helmets.
Yeah.
Okay. We've seen the.
I mean, it's 50 years of torture if you're a Viking fan, because 4 Super Bowls, no wins, all of that, great teams, never a Super Bowl win. So it leaves scars on you. So I said to Bobby, I'm having trouble. And he said, why? I told him. He goes, I have some advice for you. I said, what's that? He goes, get over it. And I did.
Yeah.
And so now, as you can see,
you're a huge Chiefs fan.
I've got my Chiefs shirt on. I'm a huge Chiefs fan. It's hard not to like the Chiefs.
Certainly is.
Even when they were not playing well, when we first got here, it was not good. And even then, they had just the quality of the ownership and the quality of the management of the team. It's hard not to like them.
Yeah, having a family ownership, too, I think that's really important.
Well, especially this family.
Yeah, absolutely.
The history of the
They're
Hunts is
yeah.
just unbelievable.
Right. So, and I think they've got a gem with John Sherman, too.
They do.
Being from here and, wanting to keep it here, and all the investors are from here as well, and he's
Yes,
a majority owner. And there's there's something to be said, Doug. There's only been 3 owners of the Royals. There's only been 1 owner of the Kansas City. The Hunt family. Lamar, of course, has passed, but just pass it on down. So
John is passionate about this. As I told you earlier, I talked to him last year. He was not that happy.
the first thing you have to ask him when you first meet him back in the day before this happened this year was, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Buying a baseball team.
He's much happier now.
Yeah, he is.
And he's got, his ownership group is made up of some pretty high-profile Kansas City people who are also trying to give back to the community. So I give John a lot of credit for doing that.
We'll talk about the kids a little bit. Is it your youngest that's in Hollywood?
Yes.
Okay. Talk about the star, and then we'll talk about the other kids who are keeping it all together.
Okay. Well, the others would not be happy with me referring to him as the star. But
I'm sorry. That's how you referred to him outside. You didn't want to refer to him in here like that?
He's the Hollywood star.
Okay, he's the Hollywood star.
The others are here.
Okay.
So
they're all stars.
They're all stars, absolutely. And let me go in order, and I'll finish with him because he's the youngest. But my oldest daughter is 53 and is a designer, very successful designer in Kansas City, and has 3 children. And then my second daughter is a graduate of DePaul University. Mm-hmm. She's done a lot of stuff, including retail. She's got 3. So we've got 6 grandchildren.
Wonderful.
Here. Yeah. And then my son, who's the youngest of the first 3, was the marketing director at the Royals up until 3 years ago, and is now a very successful real estate guy and has a technology company that he built. So they're all doing well.
Right.
And they're all here. Austin, from the time he was a little kid, wanted to act and make films. And I'm talking like 8 years old.
Right.
So he's always been on that track. He went to Chapman University out in Orange, California.
Yeah, it's in L.A.
And he's now got his own production company. He's doing commercials. In fact, he did a bunch of commercials with Justin Herbert, the quarterback.
The quarterback for the Chargers. Yes.
So it's kind of a funny story.
Well, we can't talk about him anymore now. Okay, that's the end of Austin.
No,
okay.
It has nothing to do with football. Well, it does a little bit. But anyway, so he shows up to do this. And I said, well, how was Justin? He goes, he was a great guy. He's really a nice guy.
He's supposed to be
funny,
a really good guy. Yeah.
Wanted to help, with the shoot. And afterwards asked if we wanted to go ahead and have a beer with him. And I said, well, tell me, what's his lifestyle like? Because, $183 million contract.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's nuts.
He said, well, first of all, he lives in Irvine, which is weird because you would expect him to be in Westwood or Beverly Hills or, someplace where people with lots of money live. And he said, well, it's right across the street. His house is right across the street from the practice facility. So I thought, okay,
smart.
That makes sense. I said, what's the house like? He goes, Dad, it's a mansion. And then he said it has 3 pieces of furniture in it.
So, listen, $183 million in L.A. doesn't go that far. Okay?
Exactly, right. But and then I realized that Justin Herbert's 26 and my son's 25. I mean, there's a natural bonding there.
Absolutely.
Just because of anyway.
Just attach to the hip a little bit to get that free ticks.
Yep.
Let's go here.
Exactly. Yeah. So, he's a diehard Chiefs fan, though. He would. He would still wear his Mahomes jersey even if he went to a Chargers.
If he's sitting in his suite, in Herbert's suite, he still would. Yeah.
So he's got his own production company. He just finished his first short film, which he's putting in some film festivals, doing commercials, doing editing, doing some acting. He's kind of doing all the things that he can do because he wants to make sure his chances of hitting on something are high.
Yeah, because that's a tough
business. There are 8 million people trying to do the same thing he is. So, it's hard. But he's having a great time living the life of a 25-year-old that I wish I had lived when I was 25 years old in L.A.
You were way too responsible.
I probably was, yeah. Anyway, that's the story on the 4 kids.
Yeah, that's awesome. Has he ever cross-pollinated with the Gardners? Or with the Sudeikis, or with Stone Street?
He has.
Or any of the big stuff? Because we had Justin Gardner in there, who's Heidi's older brother, and he's the charge of Kansas City Film Commission.
Right.
And so he's into that, and he's on the board of the Big Slick, and then of course Heidi's SNL and doing her thing. So I'd imagine that Kansas Cityans really stick together.
Yeah, they do. In fact,
and has he been back for Big Slick?
He has. In fact, Gloria Rudd's a good friend of Beth's.
Yes, she's
right?
wonderful.
And so she started Big Slick with her son and Sudeikis and some others. So one year, they had this bowling tournament for a few years.
Yeah.
It was out at
started poker tournament, and then he went
poker
bowling,
tournament, and then that was
now it has exploded. I mean, it is
giant.
It's amazing.
So he's out and he's bowling with Sudeikis on his team. Right, they happened to win the whole thing. I think that was fixed, maybe. But anyway, he's bowling with Sudeikis, and Sudeikis is talking to him, and he's just such a great guy. And he said when he found out what Austin was doing, he was at school at the time. He said, "Come here." So he took him off to the side, and he talked to him for maybe a good solid 5 minutes between frames. And so later in the day, I said to Austin, "Well, what's a conversation with Jason Sudeikis?" But he said to me, he said, "When you get out to L.A. and you get into the workflow out there," he said, "there are going to be a lot of distractions." He said, "Here's my advice. It's all about the work, and you need to continue to remind yourself that it's all about the work, and that's the way you have to be focused, and that's the way you have to live your life out there. Otherwise, you could get distracted by all these other things." And so when I saw Jason later, I said, "Thank you. I mean, that was the best advice you possibly could have given my son." And he has repeated that advice all the time. In fact, I was talking to him last week after he finished the short film, and I was kidding him about, "Well, finally you got something done." And he said,
"Typical father."
Yeah.
Oh, you're finally doing something.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got a great story about my dad in that regard. Okay. So he said, "Well, Dad, it's all about the work." But it reminded me, you're talking about how fathers are kind of tough on their sons. My dad was kind of a no bullshit guy. And, with his background, you can understand
Oh,
why.
absolutely. Yeah.
So in 5th grade, I was in Pop Warner, and we won the city championship. And then we had a banquet. And at the banquet, they gave out individual awards. And they gave me the award, this is in 1955, they gave me the award for leadership. So I've got this trophy, and I'm in the car with my dad, and we're coming home from the banquet. And he said, "Hey, congratulations on winning the award." I said, "Thank you. I'm feeling pretty good about myself."
Yeah, sure.
He said, "But it's not like you won MVP." And so I went from up here to down here. I'm thinking,
okay, all right, Dad, I got it.
Keeping me humble,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he was absolutely serious. I mean, he was proud of me. But,
You bet.
the standard
Right.
is up
And
here.
they always had their priorities
Yeah.
straight. I mean, they
Right.
had been through hell. They had their priorities. It's like George Brett's dad.
Exactly.
George tells the story. He says, I bat .390 that year, and highest batting ever since Ted Williams batted .406 back in the 50s or whatever it was. And he said, "Dad, what do you think? I really had a good year." He goes, "You couldn't get 5 more hits?" And George just went, "Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Dad, come on."
Yeah. That I still have that trophy, by the way. That's the only trophy.
That's great.
The only trophy I've ever kept. And the football's got a passer throwing a football on the trophy, and the football's broken off somewhere in the last 50 years.
Knocked it off the shelf.
But I still have it because I still remember that. Well, it's not like you were MVP,
Yeah, right. No, that probably guided your whole life. That was probably the guide for your entire life.
It put things in perspective, which is what he always tried to do, was put things in perspective.
Well, Bill, you are one of those people that make this such a great city. Thank you so much for coming in and for everything you're doing. I know it keeps you off the golf course a little bit, but
it does.
It's really important what you're doing to continue the upward trend of this city with the people we have here, and I just think it's incredible.
Well,
so
thanks.
I thank you so much for coming in.
Well, right back at you.
Yeah.
I think what you're doing is really important too. So thanks, Frank.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Bill Zollars, one of the reasons there's just something about Kansas City.
There's Just Something About Kansas City is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization with the mission of documenting the stories that have built our city to inspire and educate generations to come. Our work is made possible by the generous support of local partners such as the Cockrell Family Foundation and the Sherman Family Foundation. For more information about how you can help us share these stories, visit our website at somethingaboutKC.org. Thank you.